Welcome back to Rich Dad StockCast. I'm your host, Denney, and today we're pulling back the curtain on something that quietly separates average investors from elite ones: teams and mentors. Most people try to do investing alone. They watch videos, they read the books, they hope they figure it all out through trial and error. Professionals don't do that. They build teams, they learn from mentors, and that gives them a massive and often unfair advantage. And today, Rich Dad expert Andy Tanner is going to break down how mentors and teams shaped his investing career and why this might be one of the most overlooked wealth strategy that's out there. And before we dive in, go to stockcastbonus.com, grab your free investing tools. If you want to stop guessing and start building real skill, that's where you begin. Andy, welcome back.
Thanks, Del. Great topic, one of my favorite topics. And I know that this is a high value proposition for sure. So this will be great.
Indeed. And, you know, speaking of mentors and learning and education and growing, stockcastbonus.com, you yourself have put some amazing resources in there. What do we receive when we go there?
Well, that stuff's free stuff. We've got ebooks and downloads, and we're always changing it up. So if you haven't been there in a while, check it out. It's really for action takers. I often say almost in every episode that there's the listening part where you and I are going to listen to people, and then there's the action part where we actually go buy something and get an asset and you know, build the wealth and affect our financial statement. So for those that really want mentorship and action, since we're going to be talking about mentorship today, that's one place you could go to start.
I love it. I love it. All right, let's start our conversation with kind of the negative side, what most people don't do. Why do so many investors try to go out alone, and why is that such a disadvantage?
Well, I don't know that I have all the answers for that, but I do know school encourages people to be soloists. You know, keep your eyes on your own paper, do your own work. It's very much, you know, individual. There's not a lot of team grading there. You know, you get your own grade and do your own papers and do your own stuff. And it's what do you want to be when you grow up, not to what you guys want to be together when you grow up. So, you know, other than sports and maybe, you know, choir and band and, you know, stuff like that, very much an individual type of deal. And I think maybe some of that neural pathways, some of that wiring of being an individual works that way, where people don't even think to ask for help because they're told, do it yourself their whole lives.
That's a really good concept. Yeah, you get in trouble for copying the guy's homework next to you, right? In life,
yeah, keep your eyes on your own paper. That's not cheating. That's resourcefulness.
Exactly. We're supposed to be resourceful.
I suppose.
Now, going back to you, Andy, how did mentors accelerate your learning curve early on? Like, what mistakes did they help you to avoid?
Well, you know, I just remember growing up, my sweet parents. My father was a school teacher. My mom did the best she could with little jobs here and there. We always had food on the table, and they did a good job giving us clothes on their back. But also, you know, they struggled, and I didn't like that. I would stress about it maybe more than they did. You know, I'd hear them talk and balancing checkbooks and, you know, trying to clip coupons and whatever. And so I really wanted to know how money worked really bad. I really wanted to know. I went to college, played basketball, and didn't find many answers there. And I think that's where the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad really, really blessed so many lives, including mine. You know, I think 30, 40 million copies now, somewhere in that neighborhood, and 90 plus languages it's been translated into. And I've told this story a lot, but I think it's worth telling over and over again. Is a friend of mine recommended the book to me. It had barely come out. He was in the network marketing industry. I wasn't, but he was. And that book really did well among network marketers early. So it found a way in my hands, and I started reading. I said, this is one I want my wife to read. So I got another copy. So we got 2 copies, and we would read as a couple. I'd read a paragraph aloud. She'd read a paragraph aloud. We'd do a chapter a night, and, you know, then we got through it. And when we were finished with that book, we thought, and we weren't wrong, but we thought primarily that it was a book on assets and liabilities, and that the recipe was pretty simple. All right, here's the liability, you know, a doodad, don't buy that. Here's an asset that cash flows, yeah, buy that one. And, you know, there you go, rinse and repeat. So we were going to buy real estate because the book talked a lot about real estate. We looked at 100 houses and bought none of them. Because every time we got close to pull the trigger, the fog of concern would come in. Well, what if their renters bake crystal meth in the basement? Or what if it's summer now, but what if in the winter the roof is leaking? We don't know. And just all that type of stuff, when you're worried about when you don't know what you're doing. And so we failed to buy an asset. And I was frustrated. My wife said, well, let's read it again. Maybe we missed something. I go, we didn't miss something. We read it aloud. We read every word. We didn't miss anything. She goes, let's read it again. So all right, we'll read it again. And we went to the second reading and she picks it up and she goes, I think I got it. I think I know what we missed. I said, what's that? She goes, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That's the answer. I says, what? She goes, we already have poor dads. We're halfway there. And that was kind of a fun joke about our wonderful fathers, but they were great about instilling work and morality and ethics and honesty, but they didn't know about money. And it really reframed the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad for me in a special way. Rather than being primarily about assets and liabilities, it became primarily about a man who found the perfect mentor for him. And a mentor that changed his life. It was about the influence of his rich dad and the lessons that were taught. And that book was about wealth building lessons, 6 of them to be specific, starting with the rich don't work for money and ending with the rich work to learn. And it was about that mentorship. And so we shifted our thinking. And we said, all right, we're not going to go out and look for deals. And I run into this all the time, which is why it's worth retelling that story, is people are always asking for advice. They'll call into a show, the Rich Dad radio show, or write in, Robert, if you have $10,000, what would you invest in? They're always thinking about the investment rather than the investor. And that shift of looking for people rather than looking for deals, we said, well, who are the rich dads in our life? We don't have one. So let's start finding some rich dads in our own life. And that shift of looking for people that could help us rather than looking for deals made all the difference in the world for us anyway. So when you talk about mentorship, you do a personal inventory and you say, who's my Benjamin Graham? Because that's who Warren Buffett had, right? Who's my Fred Trump? Because that's who Donald had. Who's my rich dad? Because that's who Robert had. Who are the rich dads in my life? And I've been so lucky, so fortunate over the years to have some great ones. And when I look at, the mistakes I've made and the ups and downs of it all, you still wind up with some assets at the end of the day because you were working on it, right? And you got a few assets in your asset column. And you look at those, and the gratitude isn't so much for the assets, it's for the people that helped you learn how to get them. And, you don't stand at the podium and give a big thank you saying, oh, I'm grateful for all these assets. I'm grateful for all these people who blessed my life and taught me. And that's why Warren Buffett can't give a talk at his annual conference without bringing up Benjamin Graham, because Benjamin Graham shaped him into what he became.
That's amazing. Now, thinking about you, Andy, you've had some incredible mentors through the years. And I want to say that mentors, plural, right? Sometimes people think that you only have one mentor, right? But we all have so many mentors in our lives, and some people may not know that they're a mentor to us. Now, going with your personal experience, obviously, Robert Kiyosaki has been very influential in your life. Can you give us a few more mentors that you've had in your life and the lessons that you've learned?
Well, Robert Kiyosaki, Kim Kiyosaki, all of the people that were on that advisor team when we traveled for all those years together, Kenny, Tom, Garrett, Josh, Lisa, Blair, all those guys, just life-changing. I mean, I looked through my photo album with my children and who they got to grow up with, just incredible. One thing you mentioned the unfair advantage. Robert wrote the book, The Unfair Advantage, and he had us come down to Phoenix when he was writing it. And he said, I'm writing this book because I have an unfair advantage. And he asked us to take just a moment and think about our own unfair advantage. What are our unfair advantages that we have that help us win, maybe more than an average person. And for me, I wrote it down immediately. I wrote down one person. Wrote down Corey Halliday. Corey still works with us. He teaches at the Cashflow Academy. He's better than I am. And he was a Series 4 option principal for a number of years, managed hundreds of traders for a Wall Street firm on the trading floor, more risk than most people would ever even, tons of risk, that most people couldn't even fathom. And it's his job every day is like nothing to him. And understanding risk from him and having him in my corner, makes all the difference in the world. So mentors, people like Noah Davidson. You and I have a mutual friend in Than Merrill, who is not just a mentor, he's a friend and a confidant. And you hang out with guys like all these people we're talking about, men and women. It's just phenomenal, just phenomenal. And you throw in the non-financial mentors there too. The basketball coaches that I had, you learn how to compete, right? You learn how to dig deep in the second half or in practice, even to dig deep and want to practice hard. All of those mentors add up. So I guess the big thing I would say is if you're listening, do a personal inventory. Who's my number one financial mentor? How often do I interact with that person? Has that person helped me buy assets? Am I having my weekly meeting, and do I know how to mimic what that mentor does? Who's my Mr. Miyagi if I want to learn karate, right? Wax on, wax off. Who's pushing me to do the things like waxing cars and sanding floors and painting fences that made me think, well, this doesn't seem like it should be investing, but I'm going to trust the mentor. Who's doing that for you? And that's mentorship.
There we go. I love it. Well, let's do this. Let's take a quick break. Listener, if you've ever felt stuck, uncertain, or second guessing your investing decisions, chances are you're trying to do this alone. Now, when we come back, Andy's going to break down how to build the right team, find the right mentors, and use them as a real competitive advantage. And don't forget, go to stockcastbonus.com to download your free resources. That is where education turns into structure. Stick around. We'll be right back.
So far, it's been great. I needed a source where I could really enrich my education through stocks. I didn't really have an avenue for it, and it's helped me a lot. The simplicity has really gotten me on the track to where I enjoy the learning as well as it's really solidifying in my mind. And they're not just trying to sell you something, they really care about the people that are in the course, and they really do care about you and your personal goals, and what you want to do is to help you and your family and whatever your goals are in life through that. So it's really been great.
Welcome back to Rich Dad StockCast. Andy, let's get practical. How does someone actually start building a team and finding mentors without being overwhelmed?
Yeah, first of all, I mentioned when my wife and I were reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, I didn't have Robert's phone number to call him up and say, hey, will you be my mentor? That would be many years later, after several years later. And yet at the same time, if you'd have told me that I'd get to have him as the mentor that he is in my life, you'd have knocked me over the feather. I'm just an average guy. I never would have imagined that back in the 90s, 30 years ago or however long it's been since I read the book. When you talk about a team, you have mentors and they're a part of your team. If you read Rich Dad Poor Dad, one of the things Robert talks about in there is Rich Dad had accountants and attorneys and a team around him. That's a great place to start. Your tax advisor can be a mentor. So my tax advisor is Tom Wilwright, but it wasn't always that way. I wasn't always, I didn't always have that connection. So you talk to people who have what you'd like to have and are the closest to what you'd like to be. And you ask them, who is your team? Who do you use? Who's your attorney? Who's your tax advisor? Who's this and that? And who are your mentors? I've never met Warren Buffett, never had the chance to shake his hand, probably will never have that happen. But he's been a mentor to me in what I've read. I read all of those letters every year. I read all his speeches. Everything he says, I hang on every word because he is a great mentor. So, people mentor you from afar. There's lots of different ways to learn. The idea is to shift the focus generally from deals to people. Who are the people that can help me? Who can I assemble on my team as best I can? And you'll grow. Now, one thing I will tell you is more important than who to find, perhaps, is who not to find. And that's just every bit as important as the discussion to find the right person is how to avoid the wrong ones. For example, when I'm building a team, I don't want family involved in that at all. Never. Because you've got to have people you can fire, and you've got to have people you can upgrade from. My first accountant, fabulous, just learned so much. But became a time where what we were doing needed to be upgraded, right? We needed someone with a greater amount of skill. Same with attorneys, right? Same with everybody. So you always want to be in a situation where you upgrade. I also really like to pay my mentors. And there's a reason for that. I had a person come to me one time and he wanted to hire me just a little bit ago to be on his board and to help him with this business. I said, look, I'll go to lunch with you anytime you want. We'll talk business. But if I let you hire me, now you have my time and I have to give it to you. And I need my freedom more than that. And I was just frank with him that way. I'd rather just have lunch once in a while and tell you if you think what I have is worth listening to, I'd rather just give it to you. Because when you hire someone, now you have their time. They owe you. So I don't like the idea of your cousin-in-law doing your taxes for free, because you will be down that priority for him or her, way down the list. It's the same as when I would, remodel a house. I'm not going to have my cousin-in-law come help me because I need a contractor that's paid, that can be held accountable and be there on time. So you want to pay your mentors. And when Marcy and I read the book and decided, okay, it's about Find a Rich Dad, and we changed our focus, I was at a party probably within a month or two. I was at a party. I ran into an old basketball buddy of mine from years ago, from when we were like kids, like teenagers. And his name was Greg. I says, oh, what are you doing, man? Good to see you. And what are you doing? He says, well, I invest in real estate. And I said, really? Tell me about that. And I could tell he didn't want to talk about it. And he'd had friends and family ask him. I says, no, I'm interested in what you want to do. And he kept trying to change the subject, and I kept bringing it back. And finally I said, I've always been curious what a real estate investor actually does day to day. Like, I would love to come to your office, and I would like to I'll sit in the corner. I just want to see what a day in the life looks like. Who are you calling? I have a phone, but I don't know who to call. I know you have a phone and you're calling people. I just don't know who to call. You have a car. You're going to meetings, I'm sure. I just want to shout at you. He's like, man, Andy's a stalker. This guy's weird. And I could tell he wanted nothing to do with it. And finally I told him I was serious. I says, you know what? I'll pay you 5 figures. I'll pay you 10 grand if you'll let me do that. Let me follow you around for a couple of days. And then he knew I was serious. He says, you really want to know what I do that bad? And his time was that valuable. He goes, all right, Monday, you and Marcy, show up in my office, Monday, 9 a.m. I says, we'll be there. So we showed up. Now we had everything, stuff on the wall and systems and people. And he said, all right, we're going to buy your first house this Wednesday. I was like, what? I was just coming to watch. And I said, well, okay, I got my money. He says, no, we're not using your money. I says, hey, I got plenty of money. He says, no, that's not how the system works. We're not going to use your money. We're going to use this other money over here. And sure enough, on Wednesday, we bought our first home. Now, it didn't cash flow much. It cash flowed $500 after paying all the payments and all that stuff. We found a renter, put him in there. Great guy, had a sweet little daughter that had cerebral palsy, and it was one level. It was perfect for this little family. It was awesome. And we had this great renter, and we were making $500 a month off this. Now, that wasn't much money. And, I had a great sales career, and I was killing that, and, $500. But I'll tell you, it was the sweetest money that came to us because it was passive. And it was what the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book said was supposed to be like. I said, all right, there's one. Let's go get another. So that wasn't a story about real estate. It was a story about a mentor and how fast and how much confidence you have when you start looking. So it's like, stop looking for deals right now and start looking for people that can help you. And I think you'll be surprised. Yeah.
All right. So Andy, question for you, and I kind of know the answer to this, but how does being a part of a community or a coaching environment change results?
Well, if you talk about a community or really a team, one of the things that we have at the Cashflow Academy is, and Blair Singer is a big reason this is, we have our code. And this is a combination of Blair Singer and Coach Mike Krzyzewski from Duke. He's got a great book called The Gold Standard. And standards are different than rules. You don't I don't lie. I never gave my kids as a father any rules. We had zero rules. So how do you raise kids with zero rules? That sounds crazy. Well, no, we had standards, which are actually more powerful than rules, and they're stronger than rules. So we don't bow to rules. We rise to standards. And there's a book called The Influential Mind by Tali Sherritt, where she says that in order to understand influence, we've got to respect people's agency. When people feel that their agency being removed with rules, they tend to resist that influence. Like, I don't want to be bound down. I don't want my freedom taken away. You're making all these rules. You can hear a teenager, right? I hate your rules. But what standards are is when you come together and you decide how you want to live, not how you have to live, but how you want to live. And you say, these are the standards that I have. This is my standard of going to bed on time so I can be a better basketball player. This is my standard of practice. This is my standard for my homework, my grades. This is my standard for investing. And you lay down these standards, which are they're embracing your freedom because you're choosing them. And so my job as a father was to help my kids get crystal clear on what they wanted, crystal clear on how they wanted to live. And that way they're just living how they want because they're clear on it. And then certainly you're going to fall below a standard. Blair Singer says, he has this thing called responsibility, and then you fall below the line and you can blame other people or quit or justify or, whatever you're going to do as you fall below the line. And the idea isn't that you won't fall below the line. We all do. But the idea is when that happens, are you punished like with a rule? You're going to lose your privileges or get your phone taken away or grounded or whatever parents do to their kids. What we would do is if they fell below a standard, we say, well, okay, so that's not the standard that you said you wanted. Has it changed? Now that you have a moment of clarity, you can look back on it and see how things went. Is that a standard you want to abandon, or did you just have a little loss of focus for a minute and you'd like to adhere to that standard and have it part of your life? And without exception, once they got clear again, they say, yeah, that's a standard I want to espouse, Dad. So things in our house, we have a standard of kindness in how we speak to one another. It's a very important standard. It's something we care about, something we value, and it's something we want to have as a standard. So when you look at teams and community and the mentors around you, you want to find people that share your standards. And as soon as people begin to veer out of those standards, you say, well, that's probably not a group for me because my standards are different over here. And it's not good or bad. It's just a choice of standards, right? There's not some universal list. Coach K really does a good job in his book, The Gold Standard, of talking about it. And he often talks about his U.S. Olympic team. He says, we had no rules, but we had standards, is what he says. So, when you talk about community and mentors and the team around you and the clubs you want to be a part of, people with similar standards tend to attract one another.
I think that's phenomenal. And for me, I feel like from a personal standpoint, the universe has been talking a lot about standards to me, I would say. It's been such a topic I've been thinking on. And also the goals part. Someone who said, maybe switch out the goals for standards, higher standards, and the goals, the results get for themselves. And
take care of themselves. Often they will, yeah.
And Coach Signetti of IU, who just won the national football, raised everyone's standards in IU, and they became such champions. And it's such a miracle story.
Great story.
My question for you, and it may be my last question just because of the sake of time, if someone wants to stop doing this alone and start building their unfair advantage, what's one action someone can take this week?
Well, there's a lot of things you could do. Take an inventory who you know and who you know that has a life more like the one you'd like to live, and turn them into a mentor. Find out who their mentors are. If you are interested in wealth building, we have what we call the Mentor Club, which is a really fun thing. Every Monday, we do a trading session. I remember how I said I wish I could go to Greg's office and just watch what a professional real estate investor does. Well, you can see what a stock guy does and what we do on a weekly basis. And we've had people in that mentor club for 14 years following what we do. I think it's been around 14 years now. We not quite as old as our company, but 14 years is a long time to run a portfolio. So there's mentorship there. You can go to stockcastbonus.com and get to know us. And, if you feel we'd be good mentors for you, well, that'd be great. We'll mentor each other. But regardless of what you do, I'd say that first step is just as a reminder. That first step is to stop looking at deals and start looking for people that could help you and just change that context, change that shift. And you get, ask and you receive, look and you shall find, right? So you'll get what you're looking for.
Indeed. Thank you. Well, that concludes our episode, Success Leaves Clues. One of the biggest ones is this: the best investors never work alone. They build teams, they seek mentors, and they compress decades of learning into years. And a big thank you to Andy Tanner for sharing the strategies behind his own unfair advantage. Personally speaking, Andy's been my mentor through 20 years, so I appreciate you so much. You've been my unfair advantage in so many ways. And listener,
can't believe it's that long. My goodness, 20 years.
20 years. And when I make business decisions, I hear Andy Tanner whispering on my shoulder as the good angel. So I hope other people get that as well. If you're listener, if you're ready to stop guessing and start learning from the right people like Andy, go to stockcastbonus.com right now. You'll find free tools, some great education designed to help you build skills, build confidence, and really get some momentum. If this episode gave you any value, make sure you like, subscribe, share it with someone who's tired of doing this alone. You are not here by accident. You're building something that most people won't. So stay smart, stay invested, and we'll see you next time.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.